myself, but if you're a bit sensitive about that, please stay off camera. Vahid's going to talk for about 20 minutes and then leave a few minutes at the end for any Q&A time. If you want to put a comment or a question into the chat while he's talking, please do. Okay, over to you, Vahid.
So can I start now?
Yes, yes, please do.
Okay, so every year I have a topic in Pragmatics at JALT conference, and this year I have this topic, attitude toward culture as predictor of pragmatics or pragmatic competence. Okay, so talking about pragmatics. So I started with a definition of pragmatic competence, and basically pragmatic competence is the ability to convey your intention when you're talking with someone, and at the same time, the ability to understand the other person's intention when you're in a communicative situation. So that's the basic definition of pragmatic competence. And according to Bachman's model of communicative competence, pragmatic competence and grammatical competence are two distinct aspects of communicative competence. So since there are two distinct aspects of communicative competence, developing grammatical competence does not automatically lead to pragmatic competence. So in order to develop pragmatic competence, which is one of the essential parts of language learning, we have to teach pragmatic and cultural features of the target language in the class. But the problem is just mere provision of cultural features and pragmatic features of the target language in the classroom does not necessarily develop pragmatic competence, and that's based on research. And one of the examples of research conducted was by Casper and Rose, 2002. What is important is language learners' interest to pay attention to those cultural features and to notice those cultural features in order to develop their pragmatic competence. Therefore, to determine a language learner's level of pragmatic competence, there are two key points to consider. One is to provide cultural features of the target language, and the other thing is language learners' willingness to learn those cultural features. So these are the two things involved in developing pragmatic competence. So in this study, I actually tried to test that. I wanted to see whether there is actually a relationship between pragmatic competence and language learners' attitude toward learning the cultural features of the target language. So I came up with two research questions. One was, is there a relationship between language learners' attitudes toward cultural instructions and their pragmatic comprehension ability? And the other research question is about pragmatic production. Is there a relationship between language learners' attitudes toward cultural instruction and their pragmatic production ability? So I kind of divided pragmatic competence into two categories of comprehension and production to see whether it makes any difference or not. Participants of the study were actually language learners at our department, International College of Liberal Arts, Yamanashi Gakuin University. There were 50 of them. And since I just wanted to test their pragmatic ability, I wanted participants who were at the same level of language proficiency. So based on a placement test, language learners who were at the same level were selected. All of them were at upper intermediate level, and they were suitable for the study. For the instruments to collect the data, I used three different instruments. One for checking their attitude toward cultural instructions, one for testing their pragmatic comprehension ability, and one for testing their pragmatic production ability. So I'm going to talk about each instrument one by one. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is the questionnaire for attitude toward cultural instructions. So that is the questionnaire that I adapted that from Alberini. I made some modifications to that actually. The questionnaire consists of 12 items and 3 subscales, 4 items for each subscale. The subscales are affective attitude, cognitive attitude, and behavioral attitude. So as you see, I have 1 sample item for each subscale. For affective attitude, you see on the left, we had this item that says, I enjoyed the cultural components of the course. And that was item 1 on the questionnaire. For the sample of item on cognitive attitude, there is this statement, the cultural components were useful learning experiences. And for the sample for the behavioral attitude is this one. Some cultural components should be part of every language class. And the questionnaire was based on a 5-point Likert scale, ranging from 1, strongly disagree, 2, disagree, 3, neutral, is neither agree nor disagree, 4, agree, and 5, strongly agree. So that was a 5-point scale questionnaire to test their attitude toward cultural instruction. To test their pragmatic comprehension, I adopted the questionnaire developed by Taguchi, and that was a 24-item pragmatic listening comprehension test. Each item had a dialogue, a short dialogue between a male and a female native English speaker. And the last sentence of the dialogue contained an implied opinion. And then there was a yes-no question right after the dialogue to check participants' understanding of a speaker's intention. And here I have a sample. So the dialogue here is between Jane and Dr. White. Jane says, Dr. White, do you have time? And Dr. White says, sure, come in. And Jane says, did you have a chance to read my book report? It was my first time to write a book report, so I'd like to know how I did on it. And Dr. White says, oh, it's exactly what I wanted. So that's exactly the sentence that wants to check participants' understanding of implied opinion. And then there is the yes-no question that asks, did Dr. White like the book report? So the participant should say yes or no to see whether the participant has got the implied opinion or not. For pragmatic production. So the instrument used for pragmatic production ability was adopted from the questionnaire developed by Bardowi-Harlik, and that's a discourse completion task that elicits a variety of speech acts, including apologies, requests, refusals, a variety of them actually. The discourse completion task consisted of 32 scenarios. 13 of them were initiating scenarios, and 19 of them were responding scenarios. I have a sample of each type. For initiating scenario, you see the example on top. The scenario is you're talking to your friend from a cell phone on a noisy city street. You couldn't hear something she said, so we want to see what would the participant say. And then for responding scenario, we have the second one. It says, your friend needs some help moving a heavy old desk out of her dorm room. So the friend says, could you help me move my desk? And we want to see how the respondent would respond to this situation. So the answers are kind of indicative of their pragmatic production ability. Okay, the procedure. The study started at the beginning of the semester, and since the start of the semester, the cultural features of the target language, in this case, cultural features of the United States, were incorporated in language courses, and instruction continued for the whole semester. And at the end of the semester, all three questionnaires, the attitude questionnaire, pragmatic comprehension test, and pragmatic production test were administered to all participants in the study. Okay, for the analysis. So I'm going to talk about the analysis of each the data derived from each specific questionnaire. So starting with the attitude questionnaire. So as I said, the attitude questionnaire is a Likert scale questionnaire with 3 subscales of affective, cognitive, and behavioral. And it's a 5-point Likert scale, starting from strongly disagree, 1 to 5 strongly agree. To calculate the results, I calculated the mean score for each subscale and also the mean score for the overall attitude. And since there were 5 scales ranging from 1 to 5 and 3 was kind of neutral, so if the mean score would be over 3, it would be a positive attitude, and a mean score of below 3 would be considered a negative attitude for each participant. So that's the way that I analyzed the answers to the attitude questionnaire. For the case of pragmatic comprehension test, so as I said, there were 24 items on the test, and basically each item could receive a correct or a false answer. So since there were 24 items, each participant could get a score ranging from 0, it means making mistakes on all of them, up to 24, it means answering all of them correctly, or in pragmatic case, where we normally say appropriately. And I divide them into 4 groups in quarter. So those who got a score between 0 to 6 were considered to be at the poor level of pragmatic comprehension. Those who got a score of 7 to 12 were placed at the weak level of pragmatic comprehension. Those who got a score of 13 to 18 were placed at the strong pragmatic comprehension level, and those who obtained a score of 19 to 24 were placed at the optimal level of pragmatic comprehension. For pragmatic production, so for pragmatic production, we had 32 items. And to analyze the answers, I used a different strategy. I used the rubric. Actually, the rubric was developed by Taguchi 2015. For the rubric, we had a 4-point rating scale ranging from 0, cannot evaluate, to 3, which is native-like. So since there were 32 items, 32 scenarios, if a participant answered all of them at the 0 level, cannot evaluate, so would get a score of 0 on the test. If a participant answered all of them at the native-like level, would get 3 on each, so would be a score of 96. So the scores of participants would range between 0 to 96. And again, I categorize them into 4 groups. Those who got the absolute 0 would be at the cannot evaluate level. Those who get 1 to 32 were at obviously off level. Those who got a score of 33 to 64 were at a slightly off level, and those who got a score of 65 to 96 were at the native-like level. Okay, so to get the answer to the research questions, we wanted to see the relationship between attitude toward culture and pragmatic comprehension and production ability. For that case, I used Pearson correlation, and to see to what extent attitude toward culture plays a role in their pragmatic comprehension and production ability, I calculated a square correlation called coefficient of determination. Here are the results. For the attitude toward culture, you see that generally the overall attitude was positive over 3, and it was also positive for each specific subscale, affective, cognitive, and behavioral, at different rates, but still positive. For the case of pragmatic comprehension level, so I said that I categorized them into 4 categories. Majority were placed at weak comprehension level. Some of them, around 60%, were placed at poor, and around 12% were placed at strong comprehension level. For pragmatic production ability, again, I said that I categorized them in 4 categories. So majority were placed at strongly, slightly off, but acceptable. Some of them at native, like around 12% of them, and 24% at obviously off. None of them were at cannot evaluate level. The analysis of Pearson correlation to see whether there is a relationship between attitude toward culture and pragmatic comprehension, I found a strong relationship. And then based on the squared correlation, the coefficient of determination, I would say that attitude toward culture actually explains 75% of their pragmatic comprehension ability. For the relationship between attitude toward culture and pragmatic production, I even found a stronger relationship, see 0.85. And based on the coefficient of determination, I would say that attitude toward cultural instruction explains around 73% of their pragmatic production ability. To explain these findings, I explained these findings based on noticing hypothesis developed, introduced by Schmidt. So noticing hypothesis says that people learn about the things that they attend to and do not learn about the things they do not attend to. Of course, not all input has equal value, and only input which is noticed becomes available for intake and effective processing. In this study, language learners who were interested in cultural components of the course certainly directed their attention to pragmatic features. And this noticing of pragmatic features certainly developed their pragmatic competence, because the input that they received was turned into intake and effective processing, and it automatically developed their pragmatic competence, both pragmatic comprehension and pragmatic production. But it didn't develop for language learners who were not interested in cultural components of the course. Okay, thank you very much for listening. That was my presentation. If there are any questions, I'm here to answer.
Thank you, Vahid. Actually, perfect timing. And we have 5 minutes available for any questions or comments.
Yes. So we have a question from Ishihara-san, right?
I didn't mean to ask a question.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Just applauding you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, if there are no questions or comments, if we could just follow Noriko's example and show our appreciation to Vahid, either using the reactions, or I'm the only one on the screen.
Thank you very much. I'm not good at using those icons, but I appreciate attending the presentation, and I thank all of you.
Thank you, Vahid. I'll stop recording now.